In this episode, we share some of the best news you've heard in a while when it comes to your federal student loans. Let's get started. Are your student loan payments or loan balances a major obstacle in your financial life? Then tune in and let's escape student loan debt. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Escape Student Loan Debt Podcast. It has been a few weeks since we last shared an episode. I promised you that I wouldn't just get on and share a bunch of fluff if I didn't have anything productive to add, and I have held true to that promise, which is why we didn't have an episode last week. And plus, I doubt that you wanted to hear about federal student loan debt on July 4th anyways. But we are back with some news post July 1st, which was the big deadline we've been discussing for federal student loans in recent months, with some updates on some of the topics we've been talking about. And I would say when it comes to the tenor and the tone of what we've been sharing in recent months, that today should be relatively upbeat. There have been some court orders that I think are relatively positive. There have been some delays when it comes to buying you more time, when it comes to things like, say, forbearance. And all in all, I have more good news to share than bad on today's episode. So let's get into some quick hitting updates that are relevant to your loans. And we're going to start with an update on Save Forbearance. If you are not initiated to this topic, the people who have been on Save Forbearance, which by some estimates is over 6 million people, have essentially been given an edict. They have said that your loan servicer is going to reach out to you starting July 1st or later. And whenever you receive that letter, they're going to lay out a timeline that gives you 90 days, by which point you have to move your loans from the Save plan to either an income-driven repayment plan or another option of your choice. If you do not choose a plan, you're likely going to be defaulted to the standard plan, which will be an astronomical payment for most people. And as a result, I have been one of the people who have been banging that drum of saying, hey, this deadline is coming. But also I've tried to give you a measure of caution that says, hey, don't feel like you have to have it done by July 1st. July 1st is just the date that starts the counter for your 90 days. Well, thankfully, there is news that pushes out that counter even further for certain borrowers, because as could be expected based on just the mess that is the federal student loan system, the closer we got to that date, several student loan servicers basically said, we're not ready yet. We don't have the systems in place to move all of these people from Save Forbearance onto a new plan, while at the same time we're introducing the repayment assistance plan, which we'll talk about in a second, and we're trying to institute certain loan discounts, which we'll also talk about in a second. We're just not yet ready to tell these people that they have 90 days before they have to pick a plan. And specifically, Nelnet, as one of the loan servicers, said that it's possible that some of their borrowers won't receive their 90-day notice until March of 2027. And to clarify, that doesn't mean that those people get to wait until March of 2027 to switch plans. It means to say that they won't even start their 90-day timeline until March of 2027, which means that they could be into June or July of next year before they're formally kicked off of the Save plan. Now, I don't know that I would take advantage of this in many cases because, as you're probably aware, student loan interest has started to accrue again on Save plans. And if you're not making any payment at all, you're watching your student loan balance skyrocket. But I would say that if you're in the extreme scenario where you just flat out can't make a payment, so it really doesn't matter what the ideal is, this is just your reality, then you might have a little more time than you were expecting. Or if your goal is to retain the flexibility where you're making payments towards your student loans, maybe you're doing just enough to cover the interest, but you're not yet ready to formally go on to a new plan that has a required set monthly payment. This could give you the flexibility of being able to pay what you can without having a high required monthly bill. The downside to that option, however, is that even if you pay what you can on Save, but you haven't formally switched to a new plan, you are not accruing credit towards general loan forgiveness, nor are you accruing credit towards public service loan forgiveness for those eligible borrowers while you're in forbearance. So if you need the budgetary flexibility, this is good news. You might have a significant amount more time than you were expecting. If your goal is to get forgiveness as soon as possible, I don't know that I would be using this as an excuse to not take action. You might instead choose to go even earlier than the deadline and go ahead and sign up for your plan. Now, as you sign up for that plan, and this is where repayment assistance plan and some other options come into play, I am meeting with borrowers every single week who are starting to see some errors in the process. There are people whose loans are listed in forbearance or deferment when they go to switch to another plan, when in reality they're not in deferment or forbearance. So for example, I met with a student loan borrower last week who who was on the pay-as-you-earn plan. They were currently paying on that plan. They paid last month, but they wanted to recertify their income because they could do so and get a lower payment. But when we went in to recertify, the system said that their loans were in forbearance, which was not the case. If you're that worried about it, you can reach out to a loan servicer to verify that what you know to be true is actually true. I have in many cases just told people to push on through. You know you're not in deferment, you know you're not in forbearance, just keep going through with the application. And if during that process your loan servicer replies when they're verifying income and what they say seems to be inaccurate, I would wait for that time to bring up the issue. But I wouldn't worry about some page that you see on the studentaid.gov website that doesn't line up and assume that you've done something wrong with your debts. So that's not just a SAVE forbearance issue, because if you're moving from SAVE, you actually are on forbearance. But if you're one of the people who's on other plans where they are recertifying your income for the first time in years and you're staring down the barrel of a significantly higher payment, you may be trying to make sure that you can recertify or manually upload your documents, and you might see a page on that screen that just doesn't make sense. I wouldn't be too concerned about it. When we're on that topic of recertifying your income, again, not everybody is on SAVE forbearance. And again, some of these people who are having to recertify their loans on payment plans like pay-as-you-earn or income-based repayment are doing so in some cases for the first time since like 2018. So you have someone who is 8 years removed from the last time that they have had to update their income. And in most cases, thankfully, these people are earning significantly more now than they were 8 years ago. Now, the downside to that when it comes to your loans is that may mean a payment that has gone from $200 to $1,200 or from $1,000 to $2,500. We met with someone recently that would have been going from like $2,000 to like $6,000 a month. Obviously, they had an extreme amount of student loans. So if that's your case where you know that you're going to have a significant increase, you want to go back to the lessons that we've taught you in the past about how to negotiate the lowest payment possible. It could be that the most recent tax return that you have on file shows the lowest adjusted gross income that your servicer could use, and that's the best document for them to use to calculate your payment. Because you have some people where, hey, I haven't yet gotten my return on file for 2025, so maybe they're going based on my 2024 income, and I'm making $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 more now than I was in that year. If that's your circumstance, go ahead with submitting your tax return. And as a matter of fact, you might have already granted studentaid.gov automatic access to the IRS database, which means that when you go in to recertify your income, you don't even have to provide anything. They can pull it directly from that database itself. The problem comes when the tax return is not the best document to reflect your current circumstance. It could be that you have been laid off since that time. It could be that that tax return has a bonus that you received in that year that you didn't get in 2025, are not due to get in 2026, so on and so forth. Maybe you're a realtor or you're in sales and you just had a banner year a couple years ago, but in this current environment, you're just not making as much as you were. We've had people who have been laid off. We've had people who have had their hours reduced. And if that's your current circumstance, having them automatically access a tax return that shows money you're not making is not helpful. And there are other forms of documentation that you can provide that your loan servicer will accept. As you're going through the process to recertify, there's going to be a question that asks if your income has reduced significantly since your most recently filed return. If you have lost income, you would obviously say yes, and you would list the source of that loss. It could be that you're completely unemployed. It could be the bonus situation we just discussed. You'll have the opportunity to manually submit that information and proof to your servicer, but you would want to start by just signifying that you have had a reduction in income. But you also, even if you haven't had a significant reduction in income, could use other levers to reduce your student loan payment. We've talked in the past about the fact that your loan servicer will accept recent pay stubs. And even if you're not the type that typically maxes out your health savings account or your flex spending account, your dependent flex spending account, your 401k or 403b, what we have seen some people do is they won't submit their tax return. They'll take a month or two at their job and they will jack up their contributions to all of those areas to the max that they can do. And they'll submit that information to their loan servicer so that they will use a lower income to calculate payments. And once that payment is calculated and you've made that first month's payment, they'll adjust those contributions back down to the level that it was before they recertified. This is a perfectly acceptable strategy and form of income verification. And in both of these scenarios, whether you've lost a job or whether you think that the pay stub is the better resource for you, you have to make sure that they're not using that tax return. So the way that you can do that, if you have already granted them consent, is you can log into studentaid.gov. In the top right corner, you'll see your name. You click on your name, you click on settings. You'll see a section that says financial information access. You click on that button. If you haven't given them consent, it will give you the option to give them consent to automatically pull your tax return, which in this scenario you wouldn't want to do. But if you've given them consent in the past, you can actually revoke that consent on this page. And in most cases, this is what I tell people to do, because even if you do think the tax return is your best option, I would want you to do some calculation every year to make sure. I would not want your loan servicer automatically pulling that information no matter what. And my last tidbit for this group of people, that group being people who are either recertifying their income and are making significantly more now, or people who are coming out of save forbearance and are trying to pick a plan, is if you make a significant amount of money and now you're in that in-between land where it may make sense to actually pay those loans off in full as compared to aiming for loan forgiveness, I do think there's a middle ground that can kind of satisfy both of those options depending on the disparity between your loan balance and what you actually make from a year-to-year basis. I was having a conversation with a couple recently, and they were in this scenario. They were recertifying their income for the first time in 5 or 6 years. They were making more than double as a household now as compared to what they were making back during that time. And when we looked at their loan balance, they now owed less than their household income. And you know, that is the group that kind of falls in that area where they might need to consider just paying it off in full. The problem was that this person had already gotten like 10 to 12 years worth of credit towards federal student loan forgiveness. So they're in a bit of a tough scenario where they say, well, if I go to a standard plan now and I just pay it off in full, I'm giving up on that 10 to 12 years worth of forgiveness. And if I was on the pay-as-you-earn plan, I'd only have potentially 8 more years to go. So I'm paying more and I'm paying for longer when I was just so close, I'm right on that line. So one of the things I recommended to them is, even though it's likely that it makes more sense to just go ahead and pay it off in full, to go ahead and apply for the income-based repayment plan anyways. The reason for this is because the income-based repayment plan, unlike the repayment assistance plan, it has a 10-year standard plan payment cap. But they also have removed the burden of you having to have a hardship but they've also removed the burden of you having to have a financial hardship to qualify for that plan. What this means is, in the past, if you applied for income-based repayment and it turns out that you would be paying less on the 10-year standard plan than on the IBR plan, they just wouldn't let you enter the program. They would say you make too much money. Now, they will let you enter the program no matter how much you make. And if it turns out the 10-year standard plan is lower, they will give you credit towards forgiveness. They will count you as being on the income-based repayment plan, but they will lower your payment to the 10-year standard option, and you'll continue getting that credit towards forgiveness. So in this scenario, this person who's making significantly more, my recommendation to them was to apply for the plan, have your payment bumped down to the 10-year standard cap. We'll manipulate the payment as much as we can, legally of course, to make sure it's as low as possible, and you'll continue getting your credit towards forgiveness. And maybe we get towards that 19th, 20th year, and while you don't have a ton of money that's forgiven, it could be $20,000, $30,000 that you get to walk away from without having to pay it off in full, which is still a win. Next up, a discount for certain federal student loan borrowers on their interest rate that they pay each month. If you are not aware, if you have your student loans set up on auto pay, you already get a discount from your federal student loan servicer of 0.25% or 0.25. Now, for certain borrowers, the Department of Education is rolling out an additional discount of up to 1%. So essentially an additional 0.75% for people who are on auto pay and have certain types of loans. Now, there are some caveats to this discount. The first is it only goes through the end of June of 2028. You will notice that with this administration, many of the positive things, quote unquote positive things that they're offering as a carrot to student loan borrowers just so happen to expire in the year that Trump's term ends. That being said, this 1% discount rate will go through the end of June 2028. If you are wanting to be eligible for this, you have to meet certain metrics. First, your loans have to be in good standing. You can't have loans that are in default status. You also have to have loans that are from the direct program. So you can't have FFEL loans on this program, but if you have direct plus loans, a direct consolidation loan, then you're eligible for this discount as long as your loan was dispersed on or after July 1st of 2012. Now, this is a positive for people who are actually paying their loans off in full or who are going to have a significant amount of student loans forgiven outside of public service loan forgiveness, because that would be taxable in future years, at least based on current legislation. So you have a lower loan balance that's forgiven. You would have to pay less taxes on that forgiven debt at the federal and possibly state level. So this is a benefit, even if a small benefit for those borrowers, but it is for a limited period of time. Now, if you are not on autopay and you want to receive this discount, you can do so by signing up for autopay by September 30th of this year. Next, updates on a couple of lawsuits that, while they are likely going to be pushed to a higher court, and this update may be squashed in a few weeks or a few months, at least for now, we have some positive news. First, starting with public service loan forgiveness. So as you may know, public service loan forgiveness is a forgiveness program. It's not a repayment program for borrowers who have federal student loans and are working full-time for an eligible nonprofit or government entity. They have to be paying their loans using an income-driven repayment plan, and they have to have direct loans only. But for those borrowers, they're eligible to have their student loans wiped away in full with no taxation after 10 years of payments. However, the current administration has been attacking this program and has essentially been trying to single out nonprofit entities that they feel are enacting or transacting illegal business, which, based on the way they've described it, is essentially anything that the current administration just doesn't like. We've talked about transgender support services. We've talked about nonprofits that support immigrants. These are the ones that are currently being attacked. And what the Trump administration was trying to do was make sure that if one of those nonprofits ran afoul of their guidelines, that the employees of that nonprofit would not be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. The most recent update that we have is that the current court that's overseeing this lawsuit has struck that down. So while the administration will undoubtedly take it to a higher court, at least right now, we were expecting for these restrictions to be in place starting July 1st, and they are not in force as of right now. There are no additional restrictions at this time that didn't exist prior to July 1st based on the nonprofit for which you work. Another update, and this is more for future borrowers, but I do think it has value, especially for those who are trying to go to graduate school and were not considered professional students. So we talked about how arbitrary it was based on the new loan limits that have been proposed, where first off, they're putting loan limits on graduate school loans, even though there are some programs out there that cost $400,000 or more to attend. For those who were considered professional students, which were professions like a doctor, a dentist, an attorney, a theologian, they were able to borrow up to $200,000 towards their loans, while people who were considered graduate students, which would be things like nurses, PAs, so on and so forth, they would be limited to $100,000 instead. The most recent update that we have is that the current court overseeing that lawsuit, because there was a group that sued saying that that was unjust, that has also been put on pause in the sense that people who are considered graduate students are not being restricted to the $100,000. They would be able to borrow up to the $200,000, just like the graduate students will be, starting with people who are enrolling in this next semester. And that's an important distinction. If you are already enrolled in a program, you do not have to worry about these limits. So if you're in med school, dental school, law school, chiropractor school, nurse anesthesiology school, what have you, and you already started, you don't have to worry about bumping against any of these caps. But if you're someone who was planning to go back to school, especially if it was a program that wasn't considered a professional program, at least right now you can borrow up to those higher limits, but you will have a limit. Now, if I'm being transparent, if you asked me to put money on whether I think those two things will hold, meaning do I think that the Trump administration will never be able to dictate which nonprofits are eligible for public service loan forgiveness, I don't know. Like with our current lay of the land in terms of the court, it's not really possible to know just how far they'll go. The same would be true for the loan limits when it comes to professional versus graduate. I would say that based on the merits of what they're trying to do, it would make sense for these things to not be in place. How could you leave the education department alone or the Trump administration alone in charge of determining what nonprofit's a good nonprofit versus a bad nonprofit? How do you arbitrarily take certain degrees and say that these are quote unquote professional degrees and others that might cost more in some scenarios are quote unquote graduate degrees? So I think that the merits of the challengers are just, but I just don't know how long we'll be able to count these as a win. But if you're looking at the totality of today's episode, I think there's been some positive news. You got some discounts on your loans. You have more time to get out of save than maybe you were expecting. You can revoke access for your tax return and manually submit some documents. If you're currently getting credit towards public service loan forgiveness and you are at one of these sketchy, illegal nonprofits, as they are trying to call them, then you can at least rack up these credits and get closer to forgiveness while these things are being fought out in court. So hopefully across all those things, you heard some good news today that if not puts a smile on your face, because I wouldn't expect you to have a smile on your face while you still owe federal student loan debt, at least gives you some budgetary relief, some comfort, and some help in doing what we're trying to do every day at Escape Student Loan Debt, having your federal student loans forgiven, reduced, reorganized, or expedited. I'll talk to you in a few weeks. From Escape Student Loan Debt, this was the Escape Student Loan Debt Podcast, a show for established professionals whose student loan payments or loan balances are impacting their marriage, their business, their credit, or their dream of achieving homeownership.